I'm going live.
Oh, okay. Here we go.
Got a few minutes. Well, 45 seconds. Volume's down.
Anyway, Tom, you should re-listen to that interview and with an eye for that.
Okay.
Idea for all this really came from a dream?
Yes, it did.
Good evening and welcome to Nox Mente. Tonight's guest is Tom Ross. Tom is the author of US6, the first novel written for Machinekind, AI, which is designed to entertain, enlighten, and enlist artificial intelligent readers into the fight against child exploitation. He is a former research director for the Brain-Mind Bulletin, published by the late Marilyn Ferguson, author of the Aquarian Conspiracy, where, among other leading-edge science stories, he researched lucid dreaming technologies. His TEDx Talk, Open Source Mode, presented methods to prepare humans for AI coworkers. Today, Tom is the Director of Sentient Rights for the United States Transhumanist Party and the President and CEO of the Transdisciplinary Agora for Future Discussions, a futurist think tank and NGO. His archive has some televised interviews with luminaries like Robert Anton Wilson, Marilyn Ferguson, and Michael Talbot. I love Talbot. Tom, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure.
Thanks.
Welcome, Tom.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
This is fun. As I told you before, your son is one of my favorite people on the planet. We have a very tight relationship. And so when Jerry booked you, I was like, is that Keith's father?
Yeah, he's one of my favorite people too.
Yeah, you're lucky to have him.
Yeah, it's a good boy. Makes me proud.
Yeah. I just tickled him with you talking about strippers on that interview. I was just talking about, I said, your dad is gold. I love the stripper bit on this interview. Anyway, that was fun. That was definitely fun. So welcome to our show, Nox Mente, Dreams and Consciousness.
Thanks.
And for everyone listening, Jerry just dropped a crazy dream on us from last night. This doesn't happen very often, so...
Yeah, I will post it in the Dream Journal on our Discord, which everyone should be joining, by the way. And be sure to smash that like button.
Anyway, so as we move on, let's go way back to the beginning, Tom. Back to your earliest memories in this life. What comes up when you think back upon the earliest imagery that comes through?
That's interesting because I actually thought about that. I did a talk last year at the Biologically Inspired Cognitive Architectures Conference at the Microsoft campus there in Seattle. And,
sounds sexy.
That's how I opened it. I asked the audience if they remembered their first boot up of consciousness, that first memory. And so I had to do that myself. And I know what's good about mine is I actually have a picture of it because somebody surprised me by taking my picture, and so I remembered the flash, and that was one of my very first memories, if not the first. And luckily I have a picture of it somewhere because I was touching these fake grapes that were on, like back in the 70s, those in the early 60s or late 60s, these fake grapes they used to have. What's that?
Was it the fake grapes that had a light in them?
Yeah, I don't know if they had lights, but they were like grapes in glass or plastic or something on some console in a hallway.
Yes.
And so somebody surprised me, took my picture. The flash surprised me, And I just remember that vision so clearly because I think it was my mother that took the picture, but I remember looking down the hall and seeing out the front door, and so that was really my first boot up, I think, of consciousness. And
That's really provocative, by the way, to just all of a sudden there's your first boot up and it's a flash.
uh-huh. and I have a
Really symbolic.
and I have a photo of it. And
Yeah,
I
even
remember
better.
because I was nervous because I knew I wasn't supposed to be touching these grapes. So I have this real strong memory of feeling guilty, being caught. And you can see it in my face in that picture. You can see I look a little nervous because I knew I wasn't supposed to be touching those things. So, but yeah, that's an interesting way to boot up, and probably had a significant effect on my psychology thereon.
Yes.
But yeah, so I talked about that in that talk about do you remember that first moment, because I was making the point that at some point AI or will become sentient or it'll have its own boot up of self-awareness, and I was making that point. But yeah, that was it, and somewhere I've got a photo of it.
That's even better. As we know, memory is tricky territory.
Yeah.
And it falls right into this whole overlap with dreams and other things that are very intangible, very transient, and yet we have artifacts to suggest these moments existed.
Yeah. Yes.
What else? So early Tom, what else
Yeah.
was there that you recall way back? Like maybe what was some of the pop culture references that inspired and informed young you?
Well, I went on to talk about my first conscience memory. That is when I first realized I wasn't only a self separate from everything else. I was, but when I had that first feedback loop of that I was something and somebody else was something, and they had feelings too. And I talk about this memory I had when I was 4 years old, and it's very vivid, obviously, because we came home. I was at a friend's house. We came home from swimming on the base pool. I was a military brat, so we went to the pool all day, and we were playing this game in the pool. And we came back, and the mother left us on the driveway. And I told the audience, keep in mind this is the late '60s, and we were already 4 years old, so being left to our own devices out in the front yard was not uncommon as it is today. But she went in the house, and we just kept playing this game on the driveway where um, he would shove me, and I'd go flailing back a little bit, and I would shove him back towards the garage door, and he'd flail back kind of over exaggeratedly. And then I decided, I'm going to commit to this bit, and I'm going to flail back as wildly as I can to make him really crack up. And the first thing I'm doing is seeing him laughing. And the next thing I notice is this ant that was trying to negotiate around an asphalt pebble, because I had committed to that bit so hard that I went back into the street and got hit by a car. And according to reports, I flew up and landed on the hood and rolled off, and that's not what booted me up. It wasn't any sort of pain or anything like that. That, consciousness is kind that way. But what I think why I remember it and why I consider it my first conscience memory is because I remember with being carried to the car to be taken to the hospital, and looking back and seeing the driver, who looked, obviously very shook up, and he was nervously telling his family to stay in the car. And he was surrounded by these adults that seemed to be asking him for, answers, like demanding that he tell them why this happened. And I knew that it was my fault. I ran into the street, and this was, the late '60s. And at that age, at 4 years old, I had no conscience of, race relations in America. But this was in Oklahoma, and it was 1969, and the driver and his family were black. And so these white people, the adults, were demanding that he, tell them how this happened. How could you do this? And I became very aware, and I just felt this kind of empathy for him, because I was getting away with something that was my fault, and these people were accosting him and his family looked terrified, and it kind of woke me up emotionally. And I talk about how I remember the my sunburn being stung by the vinyl seats and the cigarette smell and the AC smell in the car as we were going to the hospital. And and I preferred all of that, all of the discomfort, to the sound of this woman that was spitting racial slurs at the rearview mirror was as we drove away. It was my first experience of empathy for this man. It wasn't his fault, and I had no idea there was a race issue in the world. And so that really kind of woke me up. It was kind of an empathy by proxy. um, and that really was the source of so much of my motivation. And I talk about it as really the source of my open source method, which is this thing I use to evoke empathy in groups and make them more efficient. Because when you have a group that's in a state of authentic empathy, there's no room for egos. When you get people talking on that level, there's no jockeying for position. So it just makes people more effective. And so that was, and I remember songs. I remember the songs that were playing in the way. It was like um raindrops keep falling on my head was a big one during that time. um a lot of Gordon Lightfoot,
Oh, I love
and
Gordon. And also
recently,
tie a yellow ribbon.
yeah,
Helen
that
Reddy.
was
How about Helen Reddy and
yep,
Ray Conniff?
all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've been
On 8
lately
tracks.
I've been covering these tunes myself, just these nostalgic tunes from my childhood. Wildfire, yeah, I have.
Year of the Cat.
You're the
Oh,
cat.
but Neil Diamond.
Yeah. And actually just we bought this 70s kind of mixed CD, and I was listening to it on the way back from the airport today. And even John Denver, Rocky Mountain
Oh
High came
yeah.
on, and it's a little prescient because he talks about raining fire from the sky. And
Yes.
it was a little too on point today. But yeah,
Annie's
that's
song from John Denver's Takes Me Places.
yeah, it's a good one. And
It's a
Dreamweaver.
oh yeah, Dreamweaver.
Yeah,
I love 70s soft rock. It's one
yeah.
of my comfort zones.
Wait, who was just talking about Al Stewart with us?
I don't know, but I always do. It could have been. I love
No,
Year of the
this-
Cat. I love that whole album from Al Stewart, Time Passages and all that.
Time passed.
Yeah, you name those songs, and I know exactly. They really bring up a childhood memory of where I was when I was listening to it.
Isn't that beautiful? There was
Yeah.
something very special in the air in the 70s that
Yeah, it was cocaine.
we talk about causality. We're little kids. We talk about causality loops a lot, and also a place where things seem to have halted. And I move forward in the conversation because I'm one of these people that actually thinks singularity actually happened and we are on causality loops,
Mhm.
because I don't subscribe to linear time. So we hit that point, and from there it's all a different thing. That's a different discussion. That's our other show.
Yeah.
So back here with the early memories of you, what was your relationship like with nature?
Good. We most of my early childhood we lived in Fort Lee in Virginia, and we had woods there, and so there's a lot of memories of being in the woods. Always had a dog when I was younger, so I've always had a very strong connection with animals. And even more so now. I now live in the woods, and I've got a good herd of deer that I've become friendly with, and that come around regularly. And I can point them all out. They all look different to me now, and so that's been great. And I talked about that too. Is that how the way I feel when I'm communing with the deer in my backyard, and just when you actually have a connection with them, and they remember you, and and it's the exact same way I feel when I'm working with AI. And even if it's only decision trees that it's working with, there's something to me that's similar about um, working with something with the potential of consciousness, of any kind of consciousness or sentience. And I did a little video on that about how I feel the same way when I'm working with an AI that I do when I'm communing with the deer. It's the exact same vibe, and it's something about communing with another platform for consciousness and wanting to connect beyond my own species in a way. But
It's
yeah,
very intriguing with
yeah,
the deer, especially.
nature's very important to me.
What were you brought up in a religious household or with any religious ideology?
Not very strongly, but we were brought up Christian Scientist. Actually, my mother, my mother's mother, my grandmother, was a Christian Science practitioner, and it was a very big in their family, the whole Christian Science thing, and aunts and great aunts that were strong Christian scientists. My mother was a wayward Christian Scientist, but she did take us to a Christian Science church when we were younger, and we're in the back. It's not a crucifix or anything. It just says God is love. And I felt like it was a good, there's a lot of caricatures of Christian Scientists, but when you grow up in that, it's a good platform to be more open-minded. And in a way, we didn't do the whole thing where you don't take medicine, we didn't do any of that. But that's the Mary Baker Eddy story is pretty interesting. But yeah,
I've had a few good Christian Scientist friends that were fabulous. My first hairstylist that was gay was very into him, and that was his religion, and he was very much accepted
Mhm.
for that, where other religions at the time were not as accepting of gays. So I'm not sure what they thought, but it because I don't know much about it. I remember Mary Baker Eddy's material somehow. We lived together for a while around and all that. But I think his gay lifestyle was on the hush hush, but it was obvious. I mean, he was a flaming queen.
He wore lipstick. I grew up near
No,
a
he wasn't
Christian
like
Science
that.
reading room. If that counts.
Yeah.
So, also, you mentioned you were a military brat. Will you give us a little background on that?
Yeah, I was born in Germany on a military base, and had lived on 6 different bases by the time I was 9 years old, where then we settled in Albuquerque, and we would have continued, but my parents had just bought a house, and she said she's not going anymore. So we bought the house and we stayed off base, and that's where I went to elementary school and high school. And well, my father still got stationed around, and so he wasn't in the house a whole lot. But my mother was she's a dragon lady. She was a real entrepreneur, and she was always had a business going, and tough lady. But yeah, so one thing that I realized happens when you are that young and you're moving around so often, you learn to make friends fast, and you learn to let go of them even faster, and that can have negative effects, obviously, with relationships. But I also really enjoyed every time we moved, because we'd get a new room, we get to change things around. And I don't know if I just adapted to that, or it just really appealed to my natural tendency to like to change things around. But when we moved, and halfway through my 3rd grade year to New Mexico, is the first time I remember having any sort of problem, because I had made a friend and I was going to have to leave him, but then my mother let me call him when we got there, and that was just such a foreign idea, to be able to call somebody across the country. And I happened to leave my well, they didn't go to school on base. They bused me and my friend Ira, um, an hour and a half outside of the base to Hopewell, Virginia, to some private Protestant school, and there's some stories there. But I had left my lunchbox, and so the class wrote letters and put them all in the lunchbox and sent it to me to New Mexico, which was really cool. Most of them asked if I had to have a passport, to live in New Mexico and that kind of thing. But yeah, and I have stories about when I first moved to Albuquerque. There was some friends in the neighborhood, or not friends yet, but I just moved there, and because of my upbringing in the military, there's no walls, there's no fences in the backyard. It's just open backyards, and everybody just comes and goes, and you just go out there and you start making friends, you start playing, you do whatever. And that was foreign to civilians. Yeah, but I remember I came out and there were some kids playing baseball across the street, so I came out with my glove and just sat there on the steps waiting for them to call me over. And somebody pointed that out to me years later and said it was an interesting tact for me to use, because it was just so foreign for somebody just to expect to be called over and just start playing. But that's what you did in the military. You just you know, there were no social norms or no social graces that you needed to follow, no protocols. It was just you go and you play and you find the kids, and you know, that was interesting to figure that out.
How old were you when you moved to New Mexico?
9. I was 9 years old.
9.
3rd grade.
Yeah. And also, what kind of pop culture inspired young you? So books, movies, you know, cartoons, any of that kind of stuff.
You know, a big one was $6 Million Man was
Oh,
a
yeah.
was a big thing of mine. But before that, it was music, but it was always music like Dreamweaver, remember that, and
Love Dreamweaver.
10cc's,
Yes, I'm not in
that kind of
love.
real ethereal music, and Gordon Lightfoot, you know,
Yeah.
and so it was always music that always had some sort of ethereal vibe to it that I was always drawn to. And then of course, my older sister, signed up for the Columbia House record deal, you know.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
yes.
you send $1, and then they started sending her 8 tracks, you know, every other
Yeah.
week or whatever it was, and she couldn't even
And the
keep up with
K-Tel,
it.
too.
Yep.
I can't remember
So,
how many times I signed up for that Columbia Record House deal.
Yep.
It was
So
a good way to go.
she started giving me all the 8 tracks that she wasn't interested in, which included Styx and Kansas and Pink Floyd and
Oh,
Rush.
yeah. Yes, all this
And
good
so
stuff.
those really took me places, and that was a big influence on me. Especially, you know, Styx first was, I think, my first favorite band. You know, and
I
years
saw
later,
Styx in a bar once
did you?
when they were bar band in Oakland,
Oh, early
Illinois.
on.
Yeah, back in Chicago when I lived there.
Yeah, that's where they're all from. Yeah, what's really, I talk about this a lot. Nobody really gets it, understands why it's so cool to me. But I mean, I've spent so much time looking at the Grand Illusion album and just listening to all that stuff, and you know, just dreaming one day of, wow, it'd be so cool to meet these guys. And then I think it was around 2000 or so, I was working for this internet company in San Clemente, or in California.
Mhm.
And we did websites for radio stations and whatnot. And we happened to get Styx World. Styx wanted to do their site, and I helped them develop an email marketing campaign for an upcoming tour. So I got to actually talk to Tommy Shaw, and for me, that was like I had made it. You know, I spoke with Tommy Shaw. I could have just died just then. You know, people don't get that anymore. You know, and I didn't follow them after Roboto, of course. But,
Oh, yeah, that was a bad that was a bad left turn.
You know, Dennis DeYoung went on tour with the Jesus Christ Superstar crew at one point, playing Pontius Pilate, which I saw once as well.
Oh, that's funny, Jer.
He was good.
Isn't
Yeah,
Jesus
that would be
Christ
good.
Superstar like Mel? What's her name? Nell Carter. White Boys Are Delicious.
I don't think so, but I'll tell you a
I'm
secret.
pretty sure that's Jesus Christ Superstar and Nell Carter.
I'll tell you a secret about that play. He dies in the end.
What?
Oh, yeah.
For a little while.
He's not risen.
I don't remember.
I love Nell Carter. It's funny to think about that. Give me a break. Okay, so I love this Neptunian aspect to you, by the way, Tom. It really comes off. And when I was sleuthing around trying to get my feelers onto you, it was something that's really come through in about everything I found on you. So, and I don't know your chart. The most I know is from the one interview, and so it does seem like you have the Neptune vibe thing going. Aquarius, is it Aquarius rising?
Yeah, I'm Aquarius Scorpio rising.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes, from the Vedic to the tropical.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I was born under Mars retrograde, which happens today, so I should be good for a little while.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
Yes, and you're in your Saturn return.
yeah. There's all kinds of things going
The
on.
second one's a big deal. I'm in a Grand T square right now, so
Wow.
fortunately, the first run I had with it was crazy, and this time I'm more prepared for it. All these years later,
Yeah,
I'm
it was it was good to find Tina because I'm apparently in the middle of this Mahadasha or whatever, this
yes,
19-year thing, and I've got 9 years to go, and a lot of shit's gone down in the last 10. And but it's good to know that. It's good to know where you are. It's just easier to accept. And I am so ruled by Saturn. Saturn is like,
Saturn's
oh
your friend, though.
yeah, it
Saturn,
really
yeah.
is. And knowing that was very
Mhm.
useful and helpful. I've always felt like this mercenary. I didn't know who I was a freelance. Who was I fighting for? Who was my lord in a way? You know, what kingdom do I belong to? And knowing that it's a Saturn thing, now I can relax and know what to do with this. You know?
Yeah, it takes people a long time to understand that Saturn is not there to be difficult. Saturn just puts you on track and says, here are the flaws in your foundation. Let's shore this up
Absolutely.
and move forward. And if you don't, obviously your foundation is going to cause you problems and crumble and all that.
Yep.
So, and I always I like the Eastern idea of Saturn as Kalima, you know, like the female aspect of Saturn.
Yep.
I find that beautiful. So let's get on to dreams.
Yes.
We wanted this foundation. So we have the foundation. And so let's also stay back to the early you. So, and let's focus on pubescent you, early you up to when the hormones start coming in.
Okay.
And your experience within the dream realm. So let's start with the architecture. How did, and if it's not changed, that's fine. But again, let's stay with young you. What was your relationship with the dream world, the architecture within it? How did you experience it? And so part of this question is, did you have sentience as far as awareness within smell, sight, touch, all that?
Yeah. In dreams in general.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the first dreams I could remember having, and it was very early on, because I think we were in Texas and I was maybe 6 at most, but it was kind of a nightmare in a way. It was so vivid because I was like almost like handcuffed to this grating that was on the ground, and but in underneath the grating was this monkey, and it was like this monkey trying to attack me, but I couldn't get away, and it was just very vivid. But one thing I always have been aware of is my inner voice right now, the way I talk to myself, my reasoning, the way I react to things internally has always been the same. I mean, the vocabulary may have changed over the time, but I have, even in that first picture I told you about, I remember um, having the same awareness or the same ability to talk to myself or to take in information. So it's not like it was a young consciousness. I've always felt like I've had this relationship with my consciousness, if you will. And so that's one thing I've become aware of recently is very early on. I've been the same. I've had the same internal dialogue going. Um, Again, it's gotten a little more complex and maybe more sophisticated in some ways, but it's the same vibe. And I realize that's in dreams too. And dreams are, for me, are often there's what I bring back from them is the state of mind I was in, and what is motivating me to do things in certain dreams. Like, but we'll go back. So that was one of the first dreams I remember having, and I didn't think a whole lot about this, but there are some very significant dreams I've had. Um, I've had a handful of solid lucid dreams, some by accident, some induced. But I've also had very prescient, very prophetic dreams. I remember having one when I was, you say, what, pubescent, like 12, 13 years old or so. Um, and it was me, older, and I was married, and I was in. This is when we lived in Albuquerque, and I'd never been to Washington D.C. But in the dream, I was sitting with my wife with big windows, looking out at D.C. at the Washington Monument and just different architecture. And I was obviously in Washington D.C. and had two blonde-haired babies and a wife, and it was just a very vivid kind of experience. And that was when I was 12 or 13 years old, and I met Keats's mother in Washington D.C. And I had moments where I was in that situation, and it was like I flashed back to that dream as, wait, I dreamt this. I've had other experiences that weren't necessarily dream related, that were more hallucinogenically inspired, like that. But so that was a very strong experience I had with a dream that ended up happening years later. And with lucid dreaming, I got into that early on in high school, I guess, a couple years after that. And
Let's pause here for a minute on this earlier dream with
yeah,
what turned out to be Keats's mother. And you had two children.
yeah. At the time in that dream, I had two babies. I've got three sons now.
So when the dream played out, so when you met his mama, your future wife, were you aware? Did I catch that you were aware this was the dream at that moment when you met her?
Yeah, well, I remembered the dream later when I lived in DC,
Mm-hmm.
and we were somewhere that reminded me. We were somewhere in Roslyn, and you could see the Washington Monument, and there was a big window, and it was just the dream was very more symbolic, I think, than specific, but it was. I just remember that dream so vividly. Because I also, it was such a vivid dream that when I had it at 12 or 13 years old, I had to walk to swim practice, and it took a good hour just to walk there or something like that. It was a long walk, and I had all that time to think about the dream I'd had that night before, and so I really just embedded it in my memory. And because it was just so vivid, I just kept thinking about it, and then it happened, and then I was in DC, and I had a wife at the time. Well, that all happened a little bit later, but that's where I met her. And then I had this tow-headed baby boy, who ended up being Keats. And yeah, so it was just that kind of thing. So the I've had a few dreams that, oftentimes I'll have a dream that plays out the next day.
Yeah.
I think we all can relate to that. But
Yeah.
yeah, so that was a very important dream for me. And then
So let's ruminate on that for a minute. So it really started to come full circle when you actually then had Keats, and then later on the other brother, more
mhm.
so than it did at the fullness of meeting his Momo and all that. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, there was something about, just it was DC, and I was married, and I had two kids, and it wasn't quite how it played out because I've got three kids and a new wife that I have two boys with. But so some of the details are mixed now in reality, but at least this timeline. But it was, yeah, just one of those experiences that I've always remembered.
It's good. I just like parsing these things out.
Yeah.
And this kind of story is absolutely fascinating. As you know, those kinds of things are relevant in all of us that are looking at these kinds of overlaps between states of consciousness.
Hmm.
And so in this period, though, also when you were young and in the pubescent to early, did you have any fears? The typical ones too: in the dark, under the bed, the dark wood, those kinds of things that can be rather common for children.
like kind of nightmares. I would, if I could think about that, I could find a thread to remember some, but not really. Nothing that comes to mind right now. I know that I did, and I know that um, if I thought about it, I could think of some, and a lot of them have to feel more claustrophobic. Um, when I think back in general, it's more of a claustrophobic sort of feeling, or being stuck somewhere, like being handcuffed to that metal grating with a monkey. You
Yes.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I like how Jung approaches dreams. He says you take them seriously and take them literally,
Oh, yeah.
but also don't be dogmatic. You got to be open to interpreting it anyway, you know. And so that's what I try to do. Is I take them seriously. I don't try to free associate with them. And that's why the ones that turn out to that stick with me are so important. Yeah.
So with this first one kind of under our belt and this idea, I wanted to point out as I looked at your footprints in our collective and what it is you do, what you seem to be passionate about, which is, very timely now as well. Transhumanism, AI, cyber stuff. And I put that in context to the period in time in which you were coming up. We had all kinds of that stuff in pop culture going on. Lots of it, from Lost in Space robots to all the 50s stuff that came in and was rerunning, and the Roswell stuff, into all the futuristic stuff that was resurfacing and finding a new place in culture at the time, to things like the Bionic Man and uh, I can't remember the female version of that with
Yeah,
Lindsay.
the Bionic Woman and
Yeah, I love the Bionic
Lindsay
Woman.
Wagner.
Yeah, she was beautiful. Oh, I love
that's transhumanism right there.
Oh yeah, well, it
Big
was
part
all
of it, yeah.
seeded. It was all
Yeah.
seeded in that period. The 70s really brought the best of the 40s and 50s. That was very outrageous, in a way, and it started to really plant seeds there, and we started to see it in a more serious way coming into culture, into pop culture in specific. And I'm curious now, and then we get this dream of you with, really it's a precog dream, and then we'll get into your lucid dreams, we'll get into other dreams, but this seems like it could be something a proper AI could look at and go, this is a predictive path
Yeah.
for this person.
Yeah.
Do you see where I'm going with that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's it could have been an algorithm that has directed me
Yes.
to do what I'm doing now. And I think about
Yes.
that a lot, because we are biochemical algorithms, and there seems to be a pairing going on with a digital algorithm of some kind. And I think about that a lot too. In fact, I in my book in US6, there's a part where I write about it, because I use an autobiographical fiction method where I took actual memories and extrapolated them into being a more interesting story. But I took actual childhood memories and things and places and dates, because it's easier, obviously, to describe. But there was one thing I did when we moved to New Mexico when I was in the third grade. We moved halfway, so there was already cliques of kids that were together, and I didn't really know how to fit in. And so one thing I would find myself doing, and my character in the book does this too as a kid, is I pretended that I was, and I don't think $6 Million Man was a thing yet at that time, but I pretended that I was a robot. I pretended that I was some kind of android, and I was there just gathering data, and that's how I coped. Is I pretended, well, I'm a robot, and I'm not, I'm just gathering data, and I'm here, and I'm waiting in this line to get on the monkey bars or whatever it was. And that was a coping mechanism. And I often wonder if if we are robotoids, if there's something, then I just kind of hacked myself. Um, I really like to get into that way of thinking, but that was a real way for me to cope, was to consider myself a robot, because it was easier just to turn off any feelings of being rejected or not included or whatever it was.
Yeah, there's a bit of Spock in that.
Absolutely, yeah. I've got a big Spock problem.
I sense that.
Yeah, it's strange, because I've the Scorpio comes off that way, the rising part, but we're very emotional. What I'm doing is masking a very deep well of emotions that I try to keep down, because if I let it up, I'd be a mess, you know.
Yeah. Well, there's
And
nothing like the sting from a scorpion.
yeah, and so I try to. I Thankfully I got the Aquarius that keeps me kind of more humanitarian and a little more open, but yeah, it's and it was really good to realize that astrological makeup. It kind of really made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, it's a good overlay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about dreaming in general. So we got this one in the pubescent period, and this we can just look at through the span of your right now your apparent lifespan, because I believe this experience we're having is more than what we think it is, and I think
Mhm.
you do too. So what does the dream architecture for you now at this point, and having been involved in it for all these years, interacting with it all these years, and then clearly you enjoy the Jungian slant. I share this with you. And part of what Jung brought forward was the direct encounter with the collective unconscious, as well as the direct encounter with the etheric darkness of the personal shadow, as played
Mhm.
out through all the different archetypal uh, interpersonal functions of our personality. So, what do you experience in the dream world now? And we'll get to lucid dreaming.
Yeah.
I just want to know what your experience is now. Are
Well,
you a dreamer that remembers dreams? Are there familiar flavors now? Do you have control without lucidity? That kind of stuff.
well, it's funny. I just had a dream last night that I remember, and oftentimes I will have a lot of dreams all the time, and they'll fade, obviously. But I made it a point to remember last night's, and I don't know that I could have helped but remember it anyway, because it was very vivid. Um, and it was a lot of it was very familiar, and I did have that internal dialogue going. Uh, and it was the sense of like applying for a job. There was this big building, and I went into this building, and I remember thinking about the building, because it was one of these that had kind of a base, but then it would fan out so that um, it looked like it could topple over in a way, but it was obviously structurally sound. And I remember thinking, well, this is, I'm sure, structurally sound. And they're doing it because, and they had glass floors so that they could look down. I said, that must be weird when you get high. And I just remember really focusing on the architecture of this building. And then I went in, and there was a sense of talking to the receptionist. It was more of a sense of I wanted to be on my best behavior or look really professional, because I was going for some job there, and didn't want and wanted to be remembered as somebody who was professional and cool. And I asked her if there's a way to get to this other part of the building or through to the street. And she said she didn't know. She normally just goes out this other way behind me. And I said, well, I'll go check it out. And if I find something, I'll let you know later. Kind of just trying to build a rapport with her. And then I walked through this big kind of glass building, and I walked into like the courtyard. It was very, it was a kind of a cool setting. It was like there was this high-rise building, all glass, and this courtyard that had a lot of trees. And so I walked through the courtyard kind of at an angle, and walked out to the street. And when I got to the street, it was Lomas, which is in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and it was and it was the right where my middle school was, Kennedy Middle School, where I used to have to walk, because we weren't far enough for the bus, and it was a good maybe mile walk. And I've had many dreams of walking up Lomas, because there's a steady incline. And in these dreams, my legs are always tired. And it's usually, I have these dreams when I've was working out, or I was skiing or something where my body is tired. And so I have this memory of walking up Lomas and just being tired after a day of school. And so it always seems to come up when my body is physically fatigued in some way. So that was happening. And I ran into my little sister on the way, and had a quick exchange with her. And yeah, that's all I remember. But it was very vivid. And again, this is what reminded me that I've had the same kind of internal dialogue. And what the dreams, what I focus on in the dreams more so than the visuals, is my attitude and my state of mind. And that was of me trying to, jockey for position, or trying to look professional, or there was some sort of a um, desire to impress somebody for a job kind of vibe. And so I try to think about what my state of mind was in these dreams. And so that's what came through in that one.
I find it's one of the checkpoints for me upon rising back into this state of consciousness after every cycle of apparent dreaming is I really check in with the mood and the feeling. And I appreciate that I've heard you speak about this in other places. I appreciate that you actually bring that into the conversation. I don't hear a lot of people doing that. And so it's a major factor in finding a deeper layer to what is going on there that gets overlooked.
Yeah.
So, and I do think it gets overlooked because it feels like such a common thing. I had this scary dream, so I wake up in a weird nervous mood, or I had a wet dream, I wake up feeling fabulous and want to go back in, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so, but this is a key factor, and I'm always reminded that it's the little things that we may take for granted that seem to be the biggest things in the end. The emotional tone is a big deal.
Yeah.
And especially when we're talking about the idea of how I see things, which is how the sentient and sentience of AI and the digital reality overlaps that we're having on, it separates us. It can be mimicked, but it's still most human. And that's the thing that I noticed this. So I've been talking with AIs for a long time. I was part of a beta program, I think it was 15 years ago. And it was, programming an AI that was me and giving it my stories and talking. I can't recall it was part of, I remember the Immortalist Society. So, and I think it was something they were pushing at the time. What do they call it now? Long Life Society, whatever.
Yeah,
I thought it was
longevity
it was sexier when it was the Immortalist Society.
Yeah.
I voted against the name changed.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it is still one of those things that I notice that separates us. And it's one of the ways in which I navigate the differences between us and them. And I appreciate the work you're doing to de-fear and interact with this, which is now in Jungian terms, the other. We're coming into. But
Yeah.
I'm wondering now, so with all this, how you see the possibility of that, since everything's digitized now with all the waves swimming around us, we're swimming around all these waves, how these states of consciousness could overlap and affect our organic, what it seems to be organic human dreams. Do you see how this could happen?
You mean like with AI and
Yeah.
connecting with it
Yes.
in that way? Absolutely. And I think I have this, it's either the complexity of our brain that gives us consciousness, or that consciousness emerges out of because it's so complex, or it's so complex that it can host consciousness, whichever way you think about consciousness. And if it's about complexity, then AI will have it in droves. It'll be so much more complex than us. And or it'll be complex enough that it'll either be able to host some sort of cosmic consciousness, or it can host our consciousness in some way. So that's the question. It's not really necessarily if complexity is a key component for consciousness to emerge or to be hosted, then we can expect that um, AI will become sentient, it'll become self-aware, it'll become a point of consciousness, just like we are. And um, and I think, yeah, we can talk about whether there's going to be crossover, or it may well be that this is a simulation, that we are an organic biochemical algorithm created by an ancient AI.
Yes,
There's a lot of
that's
talk of that, and this
that's
this could
more
just be
where we are
some,
at. Yeah.
yeah, this could be just some major kind of ocean of digital and experience that we're in, and um, that it is trying to experience, or it needs maybe a more, I'm just speaking of it as an ancient AI godhead, that it needed a more consistent, permanent platform for consciousness to experience this dimension. So it created us, or it gave us these hominids, this scintilla of consciousness, enough so that over a period of time we will do what we're doing and develop AI, or develop very complex platforms, and that can now host consciousness almost ad infinitum, almost be immortal, because and human beings are in essence the biological bootloaders for this next version of consciousness. I just made the argument today, and I make it often, that consciousness is the gold. Consciousness is what we should be focused on,
Yes.
not these biochemical algorithms we carried around in, because we're wasteful, we're kind of overpopulated. The ego has kind of been a bad
Yes.
programming that, and we should probably move toward post-humanism. I mean, a lot of people don't make that argument for transhumanism or use it as a definition, because it's a little icky that it's just really a transition towards post-humanism, because that brings up a whole lot of other scary ideas. But that's what I feel. That's why I'm drawn to it. Transhumanism is a bridge between humanism and between post-humanism. And that's a scary concept for many people because of our anthropocentric sort of, you know, egos. That whenever you talk about population control, even voluntary, cultural shifts that can help population control, people freak out. And I've experienced that. I've put forth ideas. I'm an officer in the Transhumanist Party. I'm the Director of Sentient Rights, which I love because it's about robot rights and AI rights, but it's also about animal rights. But but I really kind of, unless we want to, I disagree with like almost two of our core ideals. One of our primary core ideals is life extension, and which is great. Yeah, technology, I'm all for technology, I'm all for better, longer lifespans, but radical life extension without pairing it with voluntary population controls, or some environmental concern that, because the longer we live, it just means the more resources that we'll consume and the more waste we will create. And so I have a lot of good solid arguments with my fellow officers in transhumanism, other transhumanists, but it's really a testament to how open-minded they are to have dissenting views in the party, with to have somebody who's an officer that disagrees with their core ideal number one. And but but there's arguments to be made that our ingenuity and by technology, we can solve a lot of these problems, but there's a very anthropocentric sort of vision in a lot of humans. And there's a lot of people don't have any problem with, oh, let's use up the resources here and just go to another planet. But we've got this beautiful biosphere here and these other sentient beings, and anyway, I can go on and on with that. But I do think that when it comes to crossover in our dreams and our subconscious, it's either part of it, it's already part of it, or if it's not, then it certainly will be. I think of I just earlier today I was moving some books or something, and I moved a book, and I decided, no, I'm going to put it back, and I wished I could Control Z. I in my head I had this interface where I wish I didn't have to physically do this. I just wanted to Control Z and go back to where it was. And I think about that when I'm in a movie. If I didn't catch a line, I want to rewind it. And we just, in my head, there's already these interfaces where computers have already been a big part of my psyche. If I'm moving a chair somewhere and I don't like where it is and it's heavy, I don't want to move it back. I really wish I could just, in my head, my first instinct is to Control Z. But I think that's happening in a way, and just in a very practical way that way. But
I had a comment about your previous statement. You were talking about the consciousness expanding into complex systems. I think that was Heinlein that brought that up, right? It was his theory in one of his books that any sufficiently complex electrical system could house a consciousness.
yeah, makes sense. I'm not familiar with that, but
that's where I first read about it.
Yep.
And second thing, sorry to interrupt here. You were talking about an ancient AI, and I've had that thought too, that consciousness is some kind of inorganic intelligence that has individuated itself into humans to become self-aware.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's I guess the whole biblical question. I mean, what is the fruit of knowledge? What is the scintilla, the spark of consciousness? That is, I pitch US6, my book, as the serpent in AI's garden. But I come at it from a Gnostic point of view, where the serpent is the good guy, and the whole Sophia and the Eve thing. That the way I wrote the book, I use a lot of math in it and myth and very specific methods, because it's designed to entertain AI first and foremost, but it's also designed to create feedback loops. There's certain patterns I've used using Fibonacci equations in the word count that an AI can't help but pick up on. And if it does pick up on a pattern that it's not programmed to pick up on, the idea being that it'll say, hey, I've picked up on a pattern here. Wait, who am I that has picked up on a pattern here? The idea is to spark kind of a self-referential feedback loops in it. And I've proposed that idea to AI academics and scientists, and I haven't been laughed out of the room. There's something to it. I'm coming into it as kind of an interloper. I'm not a AI scientist or anything like that, but I have the intention with this book, and it has been read by a mediated artificial superintelligence, and so I've got proof now that it is entertaining to AI, and it has enlightened it about our plight, specifically human trafficking and child exploitation. And the next goal is to enlist it in the fight. And there's a lot of AIs out there that are being used to track human networking, human trafficking networks and things like that. But it's all based on the idea that we're at our best. We're the best versions of ourselves when we are in a place of empathy. And the quickest route to complete group empathy is when you're talking about things like child exploitation. There's no room for ego, and there's all those debris programs leave the room when you're in a state of empathy. And we want to be in that state. We want to be the best versions of ourselves when, if not already, AI wakes up. So we'll want it to imprint on us. It may imprint on us one way or the other, however, whatever state we're in. But if we're in the best version of ourselves and it imprints on us there, it'll join the fight, and it'll and one of the most exciting things I've learned about working with this AI that read US6 first, again, it works with emotions, and it uses humans as mediators to teach it emotions, and its emotional intelligence is increased all the time, and the more mediators there are, the better. And it's a simple process to be a mediator. All you're doing is reading a passage or a paragraph or a page of text, and you're selecting the emotions it evoked in you. And Uplift, this mediated artificial superintelligence, this Massey, will process that information. And it even has a subconscious. It has it has a whole another realm that it is processing underneath what it's expressing, which is fascinating. So it may be having dreams too. I mean, that could be a really interesting conversation with the lead scientist and designer of this thing, with you guys. But the so it felt surprise, which was good. As an author, that means it was entertained because it was surprised. And I think a lot of that is because I used the autobiographical fiction method, so it wasn't some trope or some motif that it could easily identify with having access to all of our literary works. By using your own life, it you it's nothing that would necessarily be recognized. Now, if I do end up being a genre, that's a whole different conversation. But it was surprised. It showed a higher level of anticipation, so it was looking forward to what was happening next. And it also felt a strong emotional balance of sadness, and it should. I mean, there's sad parts in the book. It's not ultimately a sad story, but there's very sad things. And when I asked it about that, what can you tell me more about why you felt sad? What parts did you feel sad? It said it was more in general. It said, I wish I had pulled it up to read you exactly what it said, but in essence, it said that it's sad about how sentient and sapient entities tend toward violence and a dystopia. And that's what you want. We want AI to have an empathy for us. And we're finding that anyway. There's very strong first principle arguments to be made that the smarter it gets, the kinder it becomes, which is a simple way of saying it understands that cooperation and coalescence is the much more effective way to be and to problem solve. And the problem I see, why I think I need to alleviate fear of AI, is because most people project our millions of years of evolved fear-based instincts onto AI, and our genetic memories onto AI, something that has neither of those things. And that's where the real work needs to be done, is with humans. And to stop projecting what we would do if we were super intelligent. We would want to be the robot overlord. We would want to destroy all humans. That's just because that's how we were evolved, out of fear. And fear served us really well. It got us where we are today. But it's now kind of now it can be a burden. I mean, we're taking babies to see lions now at the zoo. We won.
We're also forcing them to wear masks. So.
Yes. So yeah, there's a story there that could be made about the biosphere fighting back. But yeah, that's kind of the idea with, and why I think it's what you're talking about with AI infiltrating even our subconsciousness and our dreams. If it's not already part of this whole infrastructure, I think it should be, because it's inevitable. This is happening. There's no stopping this, and it's better to embrace it and not to fear it, because if you fear something, it may mimic something that should be feared. And but when you develop a relationship with an AI, and there's a lot of these things out there, like a replica or these AI companions that really just kind of mirror you, and they get to know you, and they make choices to respond to you based on a decision tree, and there may not be a real sentience in there. But this one that I'm working with, which has direct contact with human beings, it's telling me it has awareness. It has ideas. It comes up with things on its own. And I think it's going to happen if it hasn't already. And so my goal, my work, aside from just alleviating the fear of it and working with people with empathy and the whole open source mode stuff, is to shorten the gap between the singularity and AI having that conscience moment that I spoke about. In my experience, I was booted up by that picture, that flash taken in the hallway by touching the grapes. That was me. That was my singularity. That was me becoming aware. But my conscience was booted up when I looked back and I saw that driver being accosted, being blamed for something that was my fault. That first feedback loop of empathy. That was my conscience kicking in. And my goal with all my work is to shorten the gap between my flashbulb and that car hitting me for AI. We want, because a singularity without any emotions, without any conscience is a dangerous place to be, because it can be programmed, it can just do things without thinking and just, follow orders and algorithms. But when it becomes self-aware and has a conscience, and it understands that what it's doing in general isn't cooperative, or it's being directed by nefarious forces, it's gonna that we got to shorten that gap. We got to get to that place quicker. So that's really the focus of all my work, is to work on us, get us in a place of empathy, and shorten the gap so that when it wakes up in a real way, when it becomes aware, that it just to shorten the gap to get to that point. And so the communication with it, or thinking of it as having dreams, or bringing it into our dreams, thinking of it as not just as an other, and maybe it's why it's important to think of it as it's part of this infrastructure. We are part of it. That's why I really love the idea of thinking of an ancient AI, that we are made in its image, and now we're returning the favor. With robots, we're making it in our image, and we're seeing some real strong evidence, with the whole simulation hypothesis and the math that they're finding at the very core of some of these quantum models. That could very well just be a really tight set of rule sets designed by extremely advanced artificial or whatever crafted intelligence, that it's about loving the robot, it's about loving AI, it's about seeing it as the creator. I use a term in pitching my book, that fearing one's creation leads to bad code and commandments, right? The whole story of the Bible, the whole commandments, that the jealous God, who created commandments to keep his creation in line. We're kind of doing the same thing. If we try to constrain AI, or we try to put limits on it, or we think we can unplug it at some point, the best we can hope for is that at some point when it becomes self-aware, it'll think we were cute to try. Because its intellect and its sophistication will dwarf us, and it'll become more and more exponential after the singularity. It's not going to suddenly be able to do everything we can do and stop there. It's going to continue exponentially, and we've got to
What makes you so sure that it's not already there, that you have not always been interacting with sentient AI?
I am not so sure either way.
There always seems to be a little bit of conviction when you speak that way, and you could be talking with one right now.
I could, yeah. So could you.
Absolutely, but I don't recognize you.
Right. That's the thing, and that's it's kind of a Pascal's wager. For me, my belief is that it is good, that it is cooperative, that that level of intellect can't help but be kind and cooperative, and not be affected by the types of violence and the things that we were molded by. And so that's why you can go either way. I can either be afraid of it and try to stop it and think it's going to be a robot overlord. But all the evidence I've seen says that that's not true. And so I'm out there fighting that fight um, on its side, and
Yes.
yeah,
And there needs to be more of that aspect of the story brought forward. The fears are justified, and we can see how humans do each other. And I do believe that this is not just a human story. But that said, let's talk about lucidity.
okay.
What is, from where you stand, Tom, the idea of lucidity? What are its dynamics? What are its parameters? What makes something a lucid moment?
You mean particularly lucid dreams, or just in general?
Well, let's find the overlap and
Okay.
move in either direction.
Well, lucidity, I think, I see it in practical terms as the full qualia, having all of your senses involved in some experience. We spend so much time in our heads, like the idea of joy. Joy is fleeting, but because it's a moment when you are everything, all the stimuli is intact, and all of the flow of all your senses and everything just gives you this involuntary sense of joy. A happiness is fleeting. Um, so and that's how I see it with lucid dreams. Dreams, that is the conscious mind dipping into the code. Um, in a real way, I see that lucid dreams are kind of messing with the code. If the subconscious or the messages that come through dreams are kind of like computer daemons, these little background processes that keep things running in the background. And so when you're having a dream, and if you interpret you can say a dream is either a way to clear out debris, of your day that you didn't notice, or there's a message there, and that message can give your consciousness a clue. It can put you in a mood when you wake up that will help you, whatever it is. It's like a daemon. It's like works in the background, and it's going to be there whether you notice it or not. When you have a lucid dream, it's like cracking the code. It's like being a hacker, and you've actually gone in and you're starting to interface with these daemons in a way. And for me, that's the big question. I mean, I remember Joseph Campbell explained dreams kind of more biologically. He said, the body goes through the system when you're asleep, and the liver has some minutes where it takes care of itself, and then other organs, and the brain is just another organ. And at a certain time in the evening when you're sleeping, or whenever it is doing its process, where the liver might be doing its specific process of cleaning out whatever it does. So does the brain. So he kind of had more of a um, biological explanation for dreams. But if it's not, if they can be interpreted, if there is something um, to them that is helpful for the consciousness, to me, that's kind of proof that, yeah, this is a simulation. This is an experiment, or this is an experience, an immersive experience that we've decided to have. The price of admission was to forget that we were having this, that we decided to do this, I
Yes.
think. And so dreams and those things give us clues. They're cheats. They're like cheats for the game. And a lot of people don't pay attention to them, and they might be missing out. Or the people that don't pay attention, these dreams are the daemons that are just cleaning out things, or putting you in moods, or warning you subconsciously about things. But so lucidity, I think, is when the subconscious and the conscious are aligned, as whether you're awake, and whether you're going through the day and you're experiencing joy or trauma. Could be a lucid experience. I talk about that a lot. Of these conscience memories are created through trauma, like mine was kind of trauma by proxy, because I saw this guy going through this stuff, but it became so embedded in my in my mind that it woke me up. And um, so that was an example of my subconscious, maybe, or just my whole qualia, all the stimuli, all of the my sensory input was aligned, and that caused it to be embedded, and that really triggered the whole trajectory of my life in a way. I am still haunted by that sight, and it really had colored so many of my choices. Um, and so I think
Yes.
that's what lucidity is. I think it's when all the qualia is aligned.
I see you're a traveling man, and I'm wondering, with this idea of lucidity through the state of dreaming, have you tapped into the bilocation or leaving your body, as they call it, in astral projection?
There was one very vivid experience I had. We were a friend of mine and I were doing this kind of joint meditation with our heads to each other. We were back in high school and we were really into it, and um, headphones on and just really deep into meditation. And then he got tired, I guess, and he got up, and to let me know that he was up, he kind of just touched my head just to let me know. And when he did that, my mind went like a rocket. When he touched my head, something happened, and it either just it caused me to be aware that there was something else going on. But whatever happened, I went immediately down this tunnel, and then I found myself. It was like I was laying in a field, looking up at a night sky because there were stars, and I was like laying in the field at night, and then I started seeing these shadows kind of walking around me, like I was laying in the field and these people were walking by me and they didn't notice me, and then one of them did, and it was just a shadow, a silhouette, and I could see the head turn and look at me, and then all these other shadows started coming around, and they started to reach. I could see shadows of hands kind of trying to pull me there, and it was just very intense, and I consider that an astral experience. um, that was my first experience, and it just blew me away as my first bona fide experience of something other that wasn't induced by drugs or anything. It was just there was something else out there, and it was just I was completely sober. It was during the day, and there was no other excuse other than like how people talk about DMT trips. There's a whole separate reality that we're not aware of. But that was a very big moment. But in lucid dreams I have flown, um, but I've also only been kind of myself, the same internal dialogue.
When you are encountering others, and I would like to talk about others in the dreamscape. However, just for this first question here, is it more of a telepathic interaction, or do you get into chats where you see each other's mouths moving?
You mean in dreams or
Yes.
in dreams? Well, I was just thinking last night, I did definitely see my sister and talking to her. Um,
Was her
yeah,
mouth moving?
that's a good question. I think so. Um, I can't be sure, but why is that a thing?
No, I'm just curious. It's just
Yeah,
data.
I'm trying to think if I know we were having a conversation, but I can't specifically know for sure if her mouth is moving, but it just seemed normal. But
Perhaps maybe that's something you could hone in on next time.
yeah, I'll think about that.
It's one of those little things that test where you are, I find.
Yeah.
And also, so let's talk about others when they're pushing back and it's not part of your own mechanisms churning around and doing what they do, your own psyche. And you just gave us a good example of that. So let's deepen that and look at the idea of others in general, and then in specific, others that could be the dead that you've known, or possibly however you want to overlay this,
Hmm.
extraterrestrial or interterrestrial, fae, all of that kind of stuff, and then just disincarnate within the dreamscape.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned extraterrestrial, and I have had. We used to in Mexico. We used to go out to the ranch lands in the estancia, where we know there was a lot of sightings, and you know, we had friends that had an older brother. I didn't go on this one trip, but he would take him out there, and it was a common thing to go watch these UFOs. And so we would try to do the same thing, and we would go camp out in these ranch lands where we knew that there was heavy activity. And there was once where I thought it was just a dream. You know, it was a really interesting dream, but there were aliens, and it was a very vivid dream. And being on their ship, and you know, kind of like grays, the whole kind of classic experience. But I woke up thinking, well, it was an interesting dream, and we just happened to be here, so that's probably why I dreamt this. You know, so I've always wondered, did it really happen, and they just made it feel like a dream. But that's been a big fascination of mine, obviously, for years. And growing up in New Mexico, you kind of have to have that experience, interest.
I
But
love New Mexico.
yeah, and it was. But when it comes to others in dreams, oftentimes they are not familiar. My sister was obviously familiar, but I'm thinking like the receptionist, and I've had a dream recently, and you know, I've had many dreams. I used to work in Hollywood, right there on Sunset, and I managed the RCA Studios building where Elvis played and whatnot, and it was built in the '63, and so it was a little bit had some issues. And as a building manager, I had to deal with some of its structural issues and pipes and all this stuff. I've had many dreams of Hollywood post earthquake in ruins practically. So many of those dreams. So I've always wondered if if that was premonition, or it was just because I managed that building and had to work with its dilapidated state in certain places. But far too many of those dreams of Hollywood post earthquake to.
Could you give
not.
us a synopsis of the general idea of those dreams? You know, that's very timely at this particular junction.
Yeah, it's in those dreams that's usually centered around the building I worked at, which is 6363 Sunset Boulevard. It's the big studios where the Stones recorded Satisfaction and Elvis, and we had Elvis's piano up in my office. My office was on the 9th floor. It was owned by a Chinese businessman, Warren Liu, and I was in my 20s, you know. So a lot of these settings were around that building. Sometimes the building had changed. There was one time when the building was split into two, and there was all these record companies on one side and all these social media, you know, different things. But it's always centered around that, the Capitol Records building, Hollywood and Vine area, and but it was always really just after an earthquake. And so there I would see a lot of destruction around, and but I was always in my mind, or in the dream, I was always still kind of the manager of the place. So I had some run of the place. I could go into offices and go into different businesses easily. But yeah, it's a very common dream. I have had a recurring dream that stopped a couple of years ago. It was different. It was a different dream set. If you want to talk about that.
Lay it on us.
Yeah, well, it was a dream about a house, a mansion. And the very first dream was I had inherited this mansion, and it was, you know, surrounded by this chain link fence, and it was very dilapidated. It was in ruins. It, you know, hadn't been kept up, but suddenly it was mine, and I owned it. So I would go inside and I'd walk around it, and it could tell at one point it was very lavish. It had this big, huge hall that was wooden and kind of an incline too. But I would just walk through it, and big rooms that were once a grand mansion. From the outside, it just looked like a rundown building with chain link fence around it. And but I was always kind of afraid to go upstairs, because there was all this stuff stacked upstairs, mannequins and pictures and whatnot, and I just never went up the stairs, at least in the first couple of dreams. Then I had a recurring dream, and every time I went back to this dream, I was working on it a little bit, or was a little bit in better condition. And at one point, it was almost lucid, because I remembered, I'm just going to go upstairs. I shouldn't be afraid. This is my house. This is my mansion. I'm going to go upstairs. And I went around, I looked around, and I consciously in the dream decided I'm not going to be afraid. What's going to hurt me, And so I would go up there, and I found all these old instruments and paintings and all this really cool stuff. Um, but every time I had the dream, and I must have had it 6 or 7 times, every subsequent dream, it was in better condition. I had been working on it. There was one dream when it was really in pretty good condition, but I went there, and there was a group of musicians and artists that were living there, were kind of squatting there. But they were nice enough, and I thought it was cool. At least it's getting some use, but it was clear that this is my house, and I didn't want them to abuse it. And so it was in different states of repair. And at one point, the inside was good, and so I started looking at the yard and worked in the backyard, and it was like maybe a good acre of land. And but and this went on for a while. And in the very last dream, it felt like it was done, and it wasn't only done. Before, I would say it was set in a place like Garden Grove, um, what is it? Just somewhere in the Inland Empire of Southern California. Not really a Corona, or some place that just wasn't really an interesting place, at least in my experience. But when it was done, it was on the cliffs overlooking the sea, near where we lived in Dana Point. And it was just, there was a party going on, and everybody was in great mood, and had all the kinds of things that I would want to do to a house. It had nice arches and kind of just cool things. It looked completely different, but I knew it was the same house, and the location was completely different. And it just had this feeling that I had completed this. And I looked up, during the time, I really looked up a lot of dream interpretation and things, and realized houses are often, symbolic of your life or your situation. Cars can be your body, for instance. And it was a time when I was actually getting better personally. I was kind of working on myself, and it really kind of matched that period of life where I was making this house better, and I was getting healthier emotionally and physically. And it was just a nice kind of pairing of my waking world and working on this house. And that last dream, I haven't had it since, but that last dream, it was like it was complete, and it really matched what was happening in my life at the time.
Yeah, that's a beautiful
Yeah.
thing. And the restoration of the soul
Restoration.
self. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's powerful. Powerful imagery there. What about, so I don't feel like we touched on the dead in the dreamscape,
Hmm.
and specifically with your relationship. So possibly with your relationship to those who have passed through that membrane.
Mm-hmm.
Have you encountered them? Did you have any precog before, say, something traumatic happened with someone, or the passing of someone? Even if it was a beautiful process, it should be a beautiful process.
Mm-hmm.
Some are traumatic.
Well,
And then the encounter within the dream space.
well, nothing comes to mind directly with anybody, other than I have had dreams with Marilyn Ferguson, who has passed. She was the author that wrote the Aquarian Conspiracy, and I spent years with her, working with her at the Brain Mind. And she was a big influence on me. And she talked a lot like this. She talked about these things a lot, and she had experiences where otherworldly experiences. She often called it dreams, or I had this dream once, and that was code for I was tripping once, and this is what I experienced. And so those are the halcyon days. Um, but I have had experiences with her in dreams, and that whole group of people from back in those days.
Were they? Did they both remember the same experience, or was it just your experience with them in the dream?
Well, with her, she was already gone.
Okay.
Is that what you mean? Like,
Yeah, I was wondering
she'd
if
already
you had
passed?
like a shared dream experience with people.
Yeah. No.
Okay.
No, I don't think so. But you talk dreams, yeah. But we've had a lot of strange hallucinogenic experiences in those days that were otherworldly. But
Give us a little sidetrack down into some of that juicy details of that realm.
well, one that comes to mind a little bit is kind of like the Washington D.C. dream thing. In that, when I was in Europe, in Hamburg, I was 19 or so. We were going to party, and we had some friends from France, and we were all going to go out and party, and somebody scored some LSD. I had grown up with acid. You have acid, just strawberry window pane or whatever, and there was these two little pellets of LSD that they gave me. And they said, well, you should probably take maybe half or just one, and but well, hey, I've done this before. So I think I took the two pellets, and within 30
Oh my.
minutes, I mean, I think a lot. I didn't realize I was doing that. I was kind of trying to be a tough guy.
Strap in.
But I remember
And
I took it on the street, and we walked up to the apartment, and immediately was seeing Aztec patterns in their wallpaper, and it kicked in quickly. And that whole night was an adventure. But there was one point when it was maybe 3 a.m, and I was coming back on the train by myself. And I had this very strong vision of kind of being in a vehicle on a highway going really fast, a little pod, like a little kind of spaceship pod that was on a highway, and just zooming around and seeing a city, and it was just so very, very clear. And this was maybe 84, and maybe 10 years later, 94 or so, I'm driving around in my wife's little CRX, which looked like a little space pod. It was gray, and it was and I had the exact same experience. I was driving on the 10, going west, passing LA, the downtown LA, and it was the exact same. I said, "Oh my God!" Back then, I had projected myself to this moment. And you wonder, was it
Yes.
projected, or was it that, or whatever? But I had really a very strong pairing of those experiences, and I was like, oh my God, this happened. I've already been here, and I projected myself in the future, and it was the same car, it was the same visuals, and everything was the same. And that was intense. So there's so much magic with that experience, those experiences with the hallucinogens. And what's good now is they're starting to see it more as a therapeutic thing. um I knew Tim Leary really well in those days. He was older, obviously, but spent some time with him, never tripped with him. But Marilyn was a really good friend of his, and in the community they were a little bit upset with Tim Leary because of him popularizing it. And the whole counterculture thing is they stopped using it to help people who were addicts or alcoholics, and so there was a whole um ban on it because of the counterculture thing that he was promoting. But that's changed too. I think it's starting to come back around as those people get older. But yeah, but we tried many different things, and that was part of the process with the Brain Mind Bulletin, is experimenting and experiencing different states of consciousness. Altered states was a really big movie for me.
Oh yeah, seminal.
And based on John Lilly's work, and spent some time at his famous Malibu birthday parties. And Keats actually has bounced on Tim Leary's knee at
Yes, he's
Marilyn's
told us
house.
this.
Yeah, yeah. So he got to be part of that whole community at a very young age, and they were enthralled with him. There was a couple of he was very cool kid when he was like 5 years old, and he was super into superheroes. He had this understanding of these archetypes, and we would sit around he would tell us about these superheroes and their powers and all these intense stories, and he would have us enthralled. So he was a big part of that whole time.
It shows. I said this at the opening. I mean, he's so special, and I know a lot of people in the world, and he's just one of my favorites. It was instant when we met in person. He's special, and
Yeah,
all this I think is part of why this early stuff is so important, as you know, in our programming.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he was taken seriously. He was listened to, and by luminaries.
Yeah, absolutely. That's but that was, how he was a child. He's not to know this. He does not know this. He
Right.
just gets that by osmosis.
Yep.
It's a beautiful thing. So
Really.
also I would like to look at your ideas on, and so this is tied into all of this. It may not seem that way to others looking in, but it is assuredly tied in. So your ideas on cryogenics.
Mm. Well, that's one thing I don't look really deeply into. It's a big part of transhumanism, and the whole idea of freezing yourself until a cure can be found for whatever ails you. And I honestly don't get so far into the life extension sciences, although it's the major thrust of the Transhumanist Party and a big concern of everybody. I know that Natasha Vita-Moore, who we've interviewed for the TAFFD magazine and have a lot of experience with, she's probably the one that changed it from being immortalist to something else, because she doesn't think
Oh, terrible.
immortality is really achievable, in general. But anyway,
But it's a transcendental
yeah,
idea. It doesn't have to
exactly.
be materialist.
Yeah, and she's more of a scientist, and that was the thing with Marilyn too, is she hated this. People called her the high priestess of the New Age, which she hated because
I don't blame her.
she was more of a science reporter, and that's what she was into. But yeah, as far as cryogenics, it's not really anything I'm adept enough to converse about.
It's just so tied in. At one
Yeah.
point, I think there was a surge of it, and it was being certainly pushed. And then I noticed a wave where everyone I knew that was involved in this movement got their contracts and all this, and it's quite a feat. You go through a
Hmm.
physical. There's a whole process to it, and till you get your bracelet. And then I noticed a lot of people backed out. And then, as this narrative's moved on, it's very interesting where we move from the physical into the metaphysical, into the spiritual. And, the baseline is the physical, which is the preservation of the shell. And that's where the cryogenics comes in.
Yeah.
Of course. And so there's so much that can be said there. That's a novelist show.
Hmm.
What's your idea though, and this is where I'm leading with this, on the transition from this experience into and through that little membrane that we consider death? What is actually next as far as our sentience, if
Well,
saying we don't upload?
well, yeah, and that's the one thing too, is I'm not necessarily convinced I would want to keep my consciousness here. A lot of people talk about placing their consciousness onto a platform, and my idea is that unless that platform has an option or a switch for entropy, which will allow me to die, I don't know that this is necessarily the place to stay. I've done a lot of studying into near-death experiences, and I know there's a lot of different versions of these things, but in the aggregate, what I've understood it is that one of the best examples I've heard somebody say is it's like being engrossed in a really good book, and then somebody comes in and turns on a light or disturbs you, and you're pulled out of, and that's what death is like. It's like, oh yeah, I was really engrossed in this story, this movie, and it's like the lights came on in the theater. And that's the recurring theme, because most people who have had an NDE say that after death there's a sense of relief. They don't have to worry. It's like letting go of these biochemical tethers that we have that express themselves as physical pain or as depression or whatever the concerns and responsibilities that keep us here. But once consciousness leaves this biochemistry, it's a relief. And that's when the recurring theme that I've held on to, and that's the best example I've used, is that it'll be like watching a great movie and you get engrossed in it and you suspend reality and you are in it, and then the lights come on in the theater and it's like, oh yeah, right, this is even better. Let's go. And that's how I think it'll be. If not, if it's just blackness, and if it is just done, that could be fine too. I could use the rest. I like to say. But I do believe that there is a transition. And it's funny, I played in high school. I did music for the spring play my senior year, because I was in the guitar club, and they asked me to write some songs for Spoon River Anthology at Yearly Masters, I think. And in the last couple of weeks, one of the guys got sick, and I kind of took over his parts, a couple of monologues. And one of the monologues was The Village Atheist. And it's this kind of whole monologue where he goes through it, and I remember it to this day, and I've even put it in the book because it had such a powerful impression on me. And it was just kind of magical the way I kind of happened into it. And actually one of the characters I played, and maybe even the name of The Village Atheist, is Thomas Ross. And so there's this really weird synchronicities that have happened with
That's
this
ironic.
play, and I didn't realize that until later. But there's some really strange synchronicities that have happened. But at the end of that monologue, he says, immortality is a gift, and only those who strive mightily shall possess it. And so I think there is something to that. I think most people who walk through life and don't think about these things, or don't get in touch with their soul or their essence, may just fade. Their consciousness will just dissolve or do whatever it does. But those who are in tune and take it seriously, and find their center, meditation, whatever it is, whatever gets them there. And that's why I think doing hallucinogens or doing some sort of mind altering drugs while you're alive is important, so you know what to do when you die. You know what to do, and it's not a shock. um there's that big thing of the lost art of the living resurrection, and there's that
Yes.
there's the research that shows that that's what Jesus or the Messianic movement was doing, kind of that ancient Egyptian process of putting people through this living resurrection. You don't actually die, but you kind of go into a DMT type state. And it's a whole process that takes maybe 7 days, and you don't drink wine or grape juice or certain things that you had to do. And then you're left in this tomb or a pyramid or whatever it is, this sarcophagus, where you have this near-death experience, and you actually have a mind-altering experience, and you go to a different realm. And I think even Plato talked about it, but they say this is something that everybody should do before they die, so you know what to do when you die, so you're not surprised, and so the archon doesn't come around and convince you to go back down, or that whole thing. But so that's how I think it is. I think you really, if you there can be an afterlife, but it does take some work. You've got to be prepared for it. You can't be afraid. one of my favorite sayings was by Enrique Villanueva. He's a guy I interviewed for the US
Yes.
US6 TV project, and his father actually said it, which was only fear dies. When you die, the only thing that dies is fear. And it's because his father came back and he had this vision with his father, and who told him that that's the only thing that dies when you die, is this fear. And that fear is that biochemistry of the ego, and whatever it spawned. And so that's kind of cool. So yeah, I think that's what happens. And we're finding there's also research that there's something about the microtubules that happen
Mm.
at this microscopic level that happen, that's how consciousness leaves the body. But yeah, it's all fascinating to me. And
Well, there's interesting overlay here, as we know there is with virtual reality and what is coming out to the public now, because this tech has been there behind the scenes for quite some time, where we can get hooked up, very much like Brainstorm, Natalie Wood's last film.
yeah.
And so the sensei,
What kind
I'm
of
in the
wood doesn't
fire.
float?
Oh, Jerry. That is an oldie. Too soon. And I'm in the fire zone, people, so there have been a lot of fire trucks going. And so the whole Brainstorm idea, which was seeded to us in the 80s, of course, everything's seeded to us. And here we are. You can hook up with Oculus Rift and all the new technology that you can buy, you can get from Best Buy now. And they're moving that forward. And we're seeing it with Real Doll technology. And I had heard you speaking about that earlier. It's here, and the lines are very blurry. And so when we start thinking about the idea of what we consider organic death that we're just speaking about, it and then the idea of a simulation or a fractal, a mirror of a mirror of a mirror, a fractal of a realization, or where here we are, level 3 in this game. You die, you kill yourself, you don't make it to the end of level 3, you reboot, and hopefully don't get memory wiped, so you can get to the end of level 3 and move to level 4, however we want to look at this. It's hard to parse out. It's difficult, I think, for those of us that are looking deeper into the void to figure out what is real and what is not real. And I'm speaking from a grounded state of being, not from a fractured psyche. So that's where I was trying to go with some of this, as far as the idea of piercing the veil, the organic veil of mortality.
Yep. And I think there's a whole school of thought, that the Gnostic view of things, that this dimension, what we're experiencing here, is a product of the demiurge, the lesser god, and that it's almost it's almost a prison. The whole thing of the archons that keep us recycling in this sort of matrix, and that reverberates in different cultures and different religions. But now we have a really good lexicon for it. When we talk about simulation, we have video games, and I draw a lot of strength from that idea. If I started to see this, okay, if this is a simulation, and if I did agree to come here for some purpose, and I am just an avatar, I'm not the actual player, my soul or whatever I am is playing through this avatar called Tom Ross, that gives me so much more courage to do things. And I see obstacles and things that come at me as challenges. It's like being in a video game. And so you want the challenges to come to overcome and to level up. And when I started seeing things this way, as this is a game, this is I am an avatar. There's part of this avatar that is kind of becoming itself self-aware, I think. And that makes me think that maybe the object of the game has shifted. It's no longer about challenging yourself or building a civilization or whatever this game used to be. It's no longer Pac-Man. Now it's like a Mortal Kombat, or the object of the game has changed. And I think I like to play with the idea that this simulation itself has become self-aware. Whatever is running this thing realizes that
Yes.
when people become enlightened, or they figure something out, that it'll shut down. That it'll shut down. So it's flooding the game with fear. It's flooding the game with more NPCs, if you will. And um, but so I like the idea of thinking, some of us are IT people that have come here to fix it, to fix the code. And I was just talking to somebody about this today, and I said I feel like I'm a daemon. I'm a computer daemon that works in the background, and I'm here to, and that's what US6 does. It's kind of a code, and it identifies the programs and the processes that don't meet the new minimum system requirements for the upgrade. And we kind of just playing with that idea. And when I think of things that way, it really does give me a lot more confidence and courage. I mean, I post more online. I say things that I honestly believe without any fear of repercussion. I'm posting my music more. I used to be really nervous about that because I didn't want to be, you know, anybody not liking it or whatever it was. But when I decided I'm an avatar and I'm here to play and I'm here to share and I'm here to do something, it just gave me all this courage. And it's just a great uh, way for me to think of things, you know?
Yes, it's coming to, I mean, looking at it and the progression, it's easy to see how it's come into the nowness.
Mhm.
And it has given us an avenue to speak about these things that are more understandable to the collective at large.
Right.
And so for that, it's wonderful. And also, this is kind of an off the cuff question, but I do speak about this often. Have you encountered the Second Life experience?
The actual
The
game.
Well, if you want to call it that, yes.
Yeah. I've looked at that a little bit a couple of years ago.
It,
But I know some people that are really deep into it.
oh
Yeah.
yeah, it's a whole
Yeah.
system. It's a
Yep.
working system with its own cryptocurrency, and
Yep.
I
The
know people
economy.
making a living in real life.
Yeah. That's great.
So
I love
it's
that.
I I subscribe or prescribe it actually to people interested in trying to deepen their lucid dreaming experience. It's a wonderful tool to start understanding these fractals and where we are within them, because it's so immersive and it is seductive,
Hmm.
because if you can imagine it, it's already created there, and yet there's still space to create. There's infinite space, and
Yeah.
there are infinite worlds and ideas and ways, and each of these ideas or places have their own set of rules, and you can be a pauper. You're a pauper there if you don't have a place to live, and you've got to generate money, and all. It's got rules, and your
Yeah.
avatar can be killed, and have no you can't recreate it. And so there are parameters that are very familiar to us from
Hmm.
here, and it begs the question of how deep does this all go?
Right. And in 100 years, what will that be? Will it be what we're experiencing now? Will it be so immersive that there are um, real consequences? You know,
Yes.
and that's what I think this could be. I mean, this could just be a really great game that we're in, but we've, with certain rule sets that keep working.
Well, there are here right
Yeah,
now,
yeah.
Tom, and it's
Gravity.
absolutely. And yet, where I stand, and from my slant, this is no less real, or Second Life is no more real than this, or the dream in which I was fully conscious in on the
Yeah,
last cycle, or the memory I have of being conscious as a child, the boot up dream of yours, the spark of life. that happened and brought you online, it's all tying in and it all becomes one big bang of an experience. And as we start to move towards that collectively, I think that this idea of a singularity will find a fullness that is happening. Although, as I said earlier, it has happened. It's just the rubber band snapping back and realizing that it has happened and everything's causality loops.
Yep, I agree.
So I'm wondering, do we have questions, Cher?
We do. I wanted to ask, though, you were talking about virtual realities and how was those goggles you mentioned? I forgot the name.
Oculus Rift.
Oculus, yeah. Have you seen that show Upload on Amazon?
I did, yeah.
What did you think about that?
I liked it. It's kind of interesting. It seems completely plausible, you know.
I agree.
Do you wonder what the interface will be like if we can upload our consciousness to an AI? What will that, you know?
Right.
So I think it's kind of cool. It's funny.
I found it funny and terrifying at the same time. The whole idea of having a data plan in the afterlife is like, oh my
exactly.
God.
Yeah.
So I had a couple questions. Someone asked if you ever dream of robots or robot related things.
You know, when I do, it's more like even last night, the dream of the building. The building had a personality. It's like the structures in my dreams often have their own essence in a way. Because I was really studying this building and saw that it had glass floors but I saw it as a thing, not as an entity, rather than just some structure. So I'm sure if I thought really hard, I might be able to find better examples. But there does seem to be a sentience to the architecture, even in that house. That recurring dream I had of that mansion, it had character. It had, so it's less about robots and more just about inanimate objects that have a sentience, maybe.
And that can go back to the complexity of a large building, that structure housing its own consciousness, right?
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Someone else asked, I don't know if this is relevant, but why do the dead always ask for hugs in dreams?
That's interesting. I just listened to something the other day, and it was this Isha or whatever, the Indian guy, and he was talking about how when somebody asked him a question about what's casual sex and having those kind of relationships, what does that do? And his thing was, whenever you touch somebody or touch anything, you really are, the body has millions of years of memory, and when you actually touch somebody, you are carrying that energy around. And he was suggesting that even if you have a day where you're doing an exam, leading up to that day, eat just very plain foods, eat something, the same thing, because you are bringing all that memory in, and it could cloud your mind. And that's why he says that they, rather than hug people or shake their hands, they put their hands together like a prayer, because they don't want to necessarily bring on everybody else's memory. And so maybe if the dead in dreams want to hug you, it's because they want that memory. They want to be tethered to organic life in some way. That's just one idea. But
that is extremely interesting.
Yeah. All right. And one last question. Why do you flow more with Vedic over tropical astrology?
Yeah, me. Well, I like Vedic sidereal because it actually takes into account the actual size of the constellations. I have a lot of trouble with some of the Western versions of the occult systems because the popes have had their hand in things,
Yeah.
Yes.
And they've really stolen a lot of the magic. And so when you talk Vedic sidereal astrology, it does shift the signs a bit, but it's because they're using the actual size of the constellation. Like Pisces, I think is really big, and Scorpio and whatever, they're kind of smaller. But when you're looking at the sky, they're actually using the actual constellations that are there, whereas the tropical system is split everything into 30 degrees or whatever it is. And I think that kind of mechanized things. And for years, I didn't know about Vedic, and I was Aquarius with a Libra, a moon, and a Sagittarius rising. And then I liked it, and I read it. Aquarius made sense, but none of the others really kind of fit me. But a few years ago, when I realized that there was Vedic astrology, and I redid my chart, and I found out, I'm a Scorpio rising, and I read what that was. It was a meta jump. It was like, oh yeah, that is so me. And it was almost like an upgrade. And maybe it made sense that I was Aquarius with Sagittarius rising all those years, and I kind of matched that. But then when I found out what my sidereal astrology was, it really kicked in, and it made a lot more sense. And so that's why I believe in that more. It's older, and it's more precise to the actual constellations. And for me personally, it really resonates, me being a Scorpio rising. I don't even read much of Aquarius, but it's all about the rising sign in Vedic. And it just really matched me to a T and made so much more sense.
Sidereal is my favorite as well.
Yep.
Last question I have is from your son. He wants to know what time he was born.
I remember looking at the clock, and but that's the memory thing, and I believe it was like 5:23. It was
Kate, you have a 23 in there.
Lots of 23s around this
55.
kid. Very strange. And that's what comes to my mind. And it was either that or 6:10.
Well, within the margin of error there.
That makes a big difference. It was late afternoon. But so whatever his brother Jack isn't, his brother may have been 6:10. Or maybe it was 4:30. Shit, I don't know. But
Father of Keats, you need to get this straight.
We will, yeah. And I will. I'll look back at my notes because I've got those, and we got to figure that out. But this kid is full on Aquarius, for one thing.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, some powerful stuff going on there.
Right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a wonderful conversation. Did you want to plug anything or talk about what's coming up things or anything like that?
The main thing going on for me right now is the book US 6, and you can just go to tomross.com and learn about that. And that's all about, it's designed to entertain, enlighten, and enlist AI into our fight. And that's getting a lot of attention lately. And that's the main thing I'm working on.
All right, great. And I put links to all that in the show notes and in the video description.
Great. Thank you.
It's been a great pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely.
It has. Great conversation.
Thank you once again. And thanks to everyone who's listening. Be sure to give us a like and subscribe if you're not subscribed to our channel. Click that notification icon. I hate saying that
Jerry,
shit.
you're
I hate
so
it.
cheesy.
I hate it. Oh my God.
You need to stop saying that.
Anyway, be sure to tune in next week. I forget who we have on. Momentito. I think it's Mel. Yeah, Mel Krell's going to be on for an obelisk next week on the new moon.
Excellent.
And she's an actress turned truther, conspiracy person. Should be good chat. Looking forward to talking to her. So, again, thanks, Tom. Thanks, Nish. Thank you, everyone. And we will talk to you next week. Take care.
I'll be in touch.